welcome back to another edition of the Muscle Science for Women Healthy Aging series. It's me, Ashley, and you,
Beth.
Beth. And the topic that we are going to attempt to have some kind of coherent discussion around is motherhood. I feel like all the topics are, obviously, they are topics that you could do, you know, 1,000+ page books. You could do a whole series of podcasts. It's like literally doing like a 1 hour episode on the meaning of life and trying to like scratch the surface. But
Mm-hmm.
we're doing what we can with the time that we have, right? So
Right. And I think motherhood seen through the lens of aging is a really interesting topic, especially because you and I, we're different ages and our kids are different ages. So I feel
mhm.
like that's kind of rich with
Yeah,
material.
yeah. And we were saying offline we wanted to make sure that we talk about the decision not to have children and to
Yes.
not be a mother, because that's just as legitimate a decision as having one. But I think we also can't kind of forgo the stats. I think I need to look this up and confirm it. But I read somewhere that like up to 80% of women will give birth, I think, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot. That's a high percentage. And frankly, it's higher than I thought it would be. Again, maybe I don't know if there's like a generational thing where my age and maybe younger, we're certainly waiting longer to have kids,
Mm-hmm.
having kids older, all that stuff. Maybe more of us are choosing not to have kids at all, having fewer kids. That's another discussion. But 80% seems like a lot. And if
I
that
wouldn't
is
have guessed it
accurate,
was that high.
right?
Yeah.
Maybe I'm full of
No, I'm
shit
sure
or
you're
something.
right. But no,
I'll
I wasn't questioning your
yeah,
accuracy. I
I
was just
could
saying
very
I'm
well be.
surprised.
I can get a stat and maybe put that in the show notes. But regardless, I do think it's probably safe to say that it's well over like the halfway mark.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes it a really significant thing to talk about. And as you and I know, it is also, quite possibly one of certainly the most life-changing events that can occur in anyone's life. So worth talking about.
Can I read you something that I just found that I feel like is
Yes.
really important? So I had heard somewhere something about like the cells of the fetus and the mother exchange during pregnancy. And so I just looked it up and I found this just remarkable. So wait, hold on a second. Okay. Um, a pregnant woman knows okay, never mind. Let me start a little bit lower. Mother and child are engaged in a silent chemical conversation throughout pregnancy, with bits of genetic material and cells passing not only from mother to child, but also from child to mother. Um, it was a surprise when researchers at Stanford University found a few cells with Y sex chromosomes in a pregnant woman's blood in 1979. Those cells had to have come from her son, since women have only X chromosomes. So wait, I'm just skipping
Mm-hmm.
down a little bit. It turns out that all pregnant women carry some fetal cells and DNA, with up to 6% of the free-floating DNA in the mother's blood plasma coming from the fetus. After the baby is born, those numbers plummet, but some cells remain. In 1996, Diana Bianchi, a geneticist at Tufts Medical Center, found male fetal cells in a mother's blood 27 years after she had given birth. What?
Crazy. It's crazy. That's so
27
incredible.
years. Yeah. And so my kid is 15. And so my whole job right now is making sure that she feels loved and connected and tethered, while letting her go and letting her become independent. Like that's my whole job, is setting her up to be a, competent adult.
Mhm.
Of course, my child's been a competent adult since the age of
She
2,
was,
but that's another
yeah,
story.
her whole life. Yeah.
but but that idea that like a piece of her is still inside me and will be for another 12 plus years, like that is, I don't know, it just completely stuck out to me as such a huge thing.
On another level, I think that's so incredible. And there's certainly plenty to be said for a mom's connection to her kid in feeling like they are sort of part of the same person, because that kid came from you. You're sharing DNA, you're sharing cells, all of this stuff. And the kid is like an extension of you. And I feel like on a more like lighthearted note, I was thinking today, as Magnus and I hopefully are ending the diapered section of our lives together soon, right? He's coming up on potty training time. And I was changing his diaper and I was like, this doesn't gross me out the same way that when you take care of your own hygiene, it doesn't gross you out, because he's part of me. Like I thought before I gave birth, I'm like, I'm gonna have to change poopy diapers like multiple times a day for years. Like, I don't know if I can do that. Like, this baby's going to
Mhm.
be barfing constantly. This baby, like the fluids and the grossness and the sickness. I'm like, can I handle that? Like, am I going to be able to handle that? And it literally is, it's nothing. It's such a non event. Just one of the things that people kind of like stressed me out about that
Mhm.
ends up being not at all a thing that I was worried about.
Mhm.
But it's because I feel like I'm like, I still feel like he's part of me. And I've had this conversation with you about how it's wild the way these things happen subtly, but because he's still so kind of physically attached to me, it feels so weird that someday the physical separation is going to be so significant, and maybe especially so because he's a boy. Like, there will be a day when he would rather die than me like be in his bedroom, like open up the bathroom door accidentally, like, or
Mhm.
vice versa, right? Whereas now it's like I can't go to the bathroom without him following me in and trying to give me a high five. It's just like
Mhm.
it's
Mhm.
such a fascinating thing. But anyway, okay, so that's amazing. That's an amazing start off. I would like to ask, and this is kind of a very general, high level question, and maybe a little bit of a like cliche question, but I want to ask it anyway. You're, a few years into this motherhood thing now. What would you say are some of the things that have changed in you, within you, about you since becoming a mother, if anything?
Hmm. That's a good question. What has changed within me since becoming a mother? I mean, I think for me personally, and I don't know if this is like a universal thing, but I think I'm more likely to, certainly I would stand up for her to anybody over anything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a given. Um, but I feel like I'm more likely to stand up not for myself because I want to set a good example for her. In ways that I might have let something go in the past,
Mm-hmm.
I'm less likely to do that because I don't want her to see that. I want her to see the example of a strong woman, um, and somebody who doesn't like bulldoze people, but is just not going to be a giant doormat, which
Mm-hmm.
I was a giant doormat for most of my life.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like I'm much less, it sort of killed the doormat instinct in me.
Yeah.
Um, and, I mean, without sort of going into the whole thing, like, the history of my father, I was estranged from my father, and he has died several years ago now. But when we were estranged, when I was pregnant with my daughter, and he never met her, but he sued me and Mark, trying to force us to give him visitation with her, which is a whole other story, which obviously I won't bore anybody with the details. But um, that was that experience, because I was like, no, I fought it. We fought it in court. We won. He wasn't able to come near her. Um, but that was like the crystallizing of it for me, where I was like, I got the papers and I was like, no, nope.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I just was like, I need to stand like to someone who I didn't always stand up to before. I stood up to him for this. And it sort of was like, it crystallized for me that
Mm-hmm.
like, there's nothing I wouldn't do for her. And also in that moment, I was standing up for both of us. So I would say that's the most fundamental thing, is that desire to be stronger for her.
Isn't it funny how, and this isn't a judgment thing at all, but isn't it funny how much easier it is to make these sort of really intense structural, personal, behavioral changes for your kid than it is for you to just do it for yourself? Why
Yeah.
is that? Why do you think that
Well,
is?
I mean, I think we are just, I don't know if this is as true for your cohort it is as it is for mine, but I was very much raised, and I was raised by a strong single mother, but it was very much with the idea that, and not just from her, but from everyone, that you make nice. I remember specifically being told to make nice, like that everybody's comfort and everybody's like okayness is your responsibility. And that the outcome of every interaction, good or bad, is your responsibility. So you can't, those two things can't coexist. So, I learned somewhat, especially at work, to like stand up for myself and to sort of advocate for myself. But I don't think I really internalized it until I had someone else to do it for.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think it's because it's just not the way we're socialized.
Yeah.
But what
Yeah.
about you? What do you feel has fundamentally changed within you?
One thing that's coming up is this is I'd like to think that it's because I'm just getting smarter and wiser as I get older, but I definitely think the motherhood thing spurred it on is just more empathetic to other people. And the like a very judgy thing that I'm going to say right now, I used to get really mad when I would see men especially saying things like I didn't really understand like what it was like or how important it was to, I don't know, respect women until I had a daughter, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that sentence just makes me bristle, right? Because I'm just like, you always had a mom. You probably had, sisters or cousins or girlfriends or friends or
And
somebody,
we're
right?
and we're human beings. We're
And
fellow
also
human
that,
beings.
and also that. And listen, I still don't love the sentiment, but I feel since having a kid, my empathy for other mothers, for parents, for innocent children. I'm not to say I wasn't empathetic, but I feel like my heart has grown 10 times and I've become so much more sensitive and so much more understanding of other people's situations, even if I don't like I fully have not like lived in their life. But the knee jerk kind of reactions that we make every day when we see a toddler being a nightmare in a grocery store, or there's a baby screaming for 2 hours on an airplane, or anything, tired moms doing whatever they're doing, and you might want to make a snap judgment about them. And I feel like I've really, like, that's been like night and day since I've become a parent and really understood the exhaustion and the monotony and the love and the difficulty and the challenges and everything that comes with it every minute of every day for the rest of your life when you're a parent.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
feel like I have so much more empathy. A funny little anecdote. This is again a little bit offside, but the other day we were driving into town, and because again, I live sort of quote unquote in the country, I'm not in the suburbs, I'm not in the city anymore. And we were driving down, the street. It goes kind of quickly, and a couple cars in front of us sort of stopped. And you never know out here, right? Like, is there a deer crossing the road? Like, what's happening, right? And I noticed as people were slowly kind of doing this little turn to get out of the way, there were two tiny little baby raccoons on the road, and they were just like wandering around. They were so adorable, and there was
Oh.
no mother nearby. And I know what that means, right? When you see it's springtime, you see some little babies, there's no mother nearby. That probably means that the mother is gone. Probably. I don't know. We can make a story in our head. But I was so messed up from it. Like, and I know, like, listen, there's lots of people that are not parents that would see the same thing and have the same reaction. I'm just saying, I felt for the mom and I felt for the babies, and I was like really upset about it. I'm like, man, I've come a
Yeah.
long way from, you know, watching way too much Dateline to like not being able to see a baby raccoon without like tearing up. It's just ridiculous. So
No, it's so true. It's like every baby is your baby now.
kind of, yeah, I
Yeah.
really do feel
Yeah.
that. And
I know.
and just like the anger that I feel when I see other people being judgmental, like, and again,
Yeah.
this is just like the 10,000th example of why I just should not be on social media as much, but like it's a really popular kind of provocation online that gets people really riled up, are these comments or these posts about you shouldn't travel, you shouldn't do air travel with
Yeah.
young kids, or like
Yeah.
there should be separate planes for parents, or if I paid for business class, I shouldn't hear your baby crying. And like, that's a really popular sentiment. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what is wrong with you people?
Yeah.
Truly.
I do not care about those people at all. I don't care about their feelings. I don't care how much money they pay to be in business class. They can all
Absolutely
fuck
not.
right off. Oh, sorry. Can I say that?
100%. Yes, you
They can
can.
they can all fuck right off. I mean, and I felt that way when I was nursing too. Like people, I wasn't like out there with my
Mm-hmm.
boobs everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
but I definitely was like, when it was time to nurse, I would nurse her. Like, I would try to be subtle about it,
Mm-hmm.
but we couldn't do the cover thing because she would like
Sure.
hit it. And it was that to me was much more attention grabbing than to just
Mm.
sort of quietly do it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I did. And I got dirty looks. And I had a woman like basically confront me I was actually in a hospital, and before I could even say anything, this nurse came over and was like, you were in a medical said to this woman, you were in a medical facility, and this is a natural thing, and if you don't like it, you can leave.
Good for that nurse.
Yeah, but like, and I was like, I just don't care. My baby needs to eat, and you don't have to watch. You can turn
No.
and look the other way.
Mm-hmm.
I think people who don't have patience for kids, look, there are definitely parents who could do a better job of dealing with their misbehaving kids. There's no question about that. And that's the responsibility of all of us as parents to do the best we can to try to manage our kids. But sometimes babies cry on a plane and there's nothing you can do about it because it's the pressure in their ears, or
Mm-hmm.
they're exhausted because it's a different time zone or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And
Mm-hmm.
you're trying your best, but there's nothing you can do. And like, that's life. Like sometimes you're going to hear stuff you don't want to hear. And sometimes,
Yep.
just what does it cost you to just have a little empathy, have
Empathy.
a little, yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's not any better for the parents. They're the ones having to deal
It's
with the kid.
worse. It's
You can
definitely
put on
worse
your,
for the
you
parents.
can put on your noise canceling headphones and watch a movie. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just don't, I just have no patience for that shit at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah. No, same. 100% same. Okay. Let's go back to the beginning, as it were, because you and I have had some similar experiences in our, motherhood journey and some different experiences. Um, we both, I believe, were on the older side, quote unquote.
I think we were the
Um,
same age.
yeah, 37, 38,
I was
37.
38 when I gave birth. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I was 37. So yeah, say, so,
Hmm.
geriatric by some people's standards.
Yeah.
Um, I feel like, and I don't know, again, this is only like maybe a decade's difference, but I did not feel particularly challenged or concerned about that during my experience. And there are a couple of reasons why I didn't. One, because I simply would not have chosen to do it earlier. There's no way that I was emotionally or in other ways ready. So I was comfortable with my decision to wait for when I did. I did a ton of research and felt comfortable with the risks. Um, I also, had a supportive environment and community who like nobody was giving me a hard time about it. And then also I chose sort of a team, a support team, midwives and doulas and people to be around me who I think, quite fortunate, I guess. And I chose the right people who never, literally, it was never part of the conversation, not once. Um, so I felt fine being the age that I was. What was your experience?
Yeah, same. I mean, I live in New York City, so I don't think it's considered particularly old here, because most people are kind of on the older side, sort of
Yeah.
relatively speaking.
Mm-hmm.
I did have one. I started off with a medical model. I started off with an OBGYN and I switched in my 7th month to a midwife. And
Mm-hmm.
I just wish I had done it sooner. But
Mm-hmm.
so the doctor and I, one of the things that we disagreed on was that she wanted me to have an amnio. And I said, no, absolutely not. And Mark and I had had genetic testing to within an inch of our lives. So whatever risk there was lower, given that we went into it kind of knowing where we stood.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we looked at like the whole thing about why you do an amnio at 35, and it's like the risk, it basically is when the risk crosses between the risk of a problem and the risk of miscarriage. But it
Mm-hmm.
seems so arbitrary to us. Like
Mm-hmm.
when you're 34 years old, 364 days, it's one thing. And it just didn't make any sense. And
Mm-hmm.
we were comfortable not doing it. So even though the doctor like admonished me to do it, I didn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And everything worked out fine.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, I really didn't, especially because with a midwife, there's nobody trying to get you to, be induced on your due date and all the other
Right.
bullshit that happens to
Right.
geriatric pregnancies
Right.
in the medical world. So,
I wonder if I think the amnio situation has changed pretty drastically recently. And maybe again, this changes depending on where you live in the world. But I
Hmm.
know my mom, she had four kids, and her last kid, she was 35. And I think it also differs if you've had previous children when you were younger, maybe some risks, whatever. But she had amnio with her youngest child because she was
Hmm.
35. That was never even like addressed with me. I did do all the, possible kind of early screening and detection, but it was blood tests. Like I think that
Hmm.
amnio isn't necessarily like a as commonly used, thank goodness, because man, that does not look like a good time at all. Um, Pretty scary.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Maybe it's not done as much anymore. I mean, this was going back, 15 plus years ago.
yeah.
So,
And again, I'm one of those people who more research about stuff helps me. I know lots of people, and I've
sorry.
had. Oh, sorry.
Sorry. No, it's my kid is requesting something from me.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Sorry. Sorry.
Okay. That's what editing's for.
She she has to uh she has to request apps from us.
Oh, like get permission.
Yeah.
That's smart.
Um, I'm so sorry. I'm just looking up the password. Um, okay, sorry. So sorry.
That's okay. Are you good?
Yeah, she doesn't know I'm in the middle of something. So
Okay, that's okay. Um, I was saying I find personally for me that doing a lot of research about something that's a big deal in my life makes me feel better. I've definitely chatted with a lot of friends and other people who are like, the more research just sends me down like panic spirals because I end up researching stuff that makes me more paranoid and more scared. For me, it's the opposite. But one thing that I think is useful to note, and I remember talking to my midwives about this, is a lot of this geriatric pregnancy and the way things are treated differently at different age markers, which used to be very explicitly sort of 35 and up, trouble time, and 35 below, again, very arbitrary, 34 and three quarters, good to go, and 35, you're an old person now.
hmm.
Um, and now it's sort of being more, I think, pushed to like 40 and up is when risks kind of make a jump that's somewhat more significant. But even so, it's normally things like genetic issues or a risk of Down syndrome or things like that quote unquote jump at certain ages. Um, but statistically, again, it's not like when we hear terms like you're twice as likely at 42 to have complications as you are when you're 22 or something. Twice as likely could be, a
Hmm.
0.8% chance, and that doubles, which is still a low chance in the
Hmm.
grand scheme of things. So it's worth some in some cases when there are things that you're worried about, it's worth digging a little deeper for the information to see what exactly, when they're saying there's a risk or an increased risk or whatever, what does it actually mean? Does it mean, is that significant to me? Is it worth the risk? Is it not? A little bit of extra research can really sometimes help. I really do think knowledge is power. I don't think everyone has to research pregnancy and delivery and birth and postpartum and stuff as much as I did necessarily. I feel good about how much time I spent doing it, but a little bit of research, I think, when you are concerned about things, can really go a long way. And it's like any other facet of health, right? The more you know and the more you educate yourself and empower yourself about the things that matter to you, I think the better off you're going to be. And especially in a medicalized situation like this one, where advocating for yourself is so important.
Hmm.
And we feel oftentimes like we can't advocate for ourselves. It's this added fear of, well, you're not just doing this for you, you're doing it for the health of the baby. And so if a authority figure like a doctor tells you do XYZ, you're going to do it without questioning. And you're allowed to question. You're allowed to
Hmm.
question things when it's about your body and the decisions you're going to make for your life and your family. And and all of those things. So anyway.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And I would say that it is easy to get frightened in those situations because the stuff that you're being, not that the doctor is threatening you with something, but the stuff that is threatening, that threatening, feels so big and it feels
Mhm.
like life and death.
Mhm.
And also, when you're looking at those numbers, if you are sort of digging into it, especially for this audience specifically, you have to also look at what the other risk factors are. So if you're talking about like there's a certain percentage of people who deal with XYZ, like is that the average woman in the US? Because the average woman, as we know, like a lot of people have like, are dealing with obesity or dealing with autoimmune disease and, all kinds of health issues. And so yeah, that might be more of a concern for somebody who is dealing with other types of health issues than someone who is, kind of like on the other end and, it has the good fortune of, being in good health.
Sure.
So it's just
Yeah.
something to think about that it may not really apply to you in the same way.
Mhm. One thing that I thought we both could address, because we mentioned off the top here that it's obviously your own decision when whether you decide to have a child or not, and that not having a child doesn't make you any less of a woman or a fully realized human being. It's ridiculous to
Hmm.
even think that way. And I feel like I can really kind of see both sides because I grew up not wanting to have kids and feeling like I was not going to have kids until quite recently before getting pregnant. So I felt quite strong at the time in my convictions and my reasons and my beliefs. And I never really, I think, until the point that I changed my mind, like felt like I was, I don't know, betraying my biological instincts or something. I just like it.
Hmm.
I had thought about the decision and the reasons, and I had felt like not having a child was what I was going to do, and I was okay with that. How what was the decision making process for you? Like, did you feel that way too? Did you always know you wanted to have a child? You just waited until the time was right? What was your kind of thought process?
Yeah. I mean, before I answer that, I just wanted to say that like, I feel like the decision not to have a baby is one decision. And then because we're talking about this in the context of aging, it's sort of interesting to look through the lens of somebody who is past that time and has made the decision and has sort of, been through their sort of middle adulthood and is now entering, the sort of second half or, you
Mm-hmm.
know, third or however you want
Mm-hmm.
to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because I have plenty of friends who don't have kids for one reason or another, some who set out not to, and knew early on they didn't want to, some who thought they would have them and never did, or, for whatever reason, they don't have kids. And I think it's really interesting to see that, um, for the most part, I have never run into somebody, and it's not scientific, obviously, but I have not run into people who are like, oh, if only I had done it. Like the
Mm-hmm.
people who, and maybe it's something they don't talk about. Certainly you're unlikely to hear a person who has kids telling you that they regret it. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that happens,
Mm-hmm.
but nobody's going to say that.
Mm-hmm.
But I just wanted to say that because I feel like I feel like that's often something that's said, like you'll regret it later or you'll
Mm.
change your mind. And it's just, I just think it's so insensitive to people who just, they don't want kids. Like,
Mm-hmm.
let it go. Like,
And you
why,
can't understand their story and their
no.
mind
And
and what they're, yeah.
yeah. And it's not for you to understand. Like, we're
Yeah.
all adults. Let adults make the decision that they
Yeah.
want to make about their life. I just
Yeah.
don't get it.
Yeah.
But anyway, I really wanted a kid and I wasn't sure if I would want more than one. I kind of was like, let's have one and see how it goes.
Mm-hmm.
But I am really glad I did not have one until I did. I was married previously, very briefly, and that having even though my ex is a lovely person and is a dad now with someone else, and I'm sure he is a wonderful dad, we were totally wrong for each other, and I'm glad that that didn't happen for us, so that we are not tethered together in that way, and that the child didn't have to deal with that. So I'm really glad that I didn't have one when I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And with Mark and me, like, I was 34 when we got married. We waited a couple of years after to have a baby, which felt like the right thing to do. We had her when we were ready to have her. And
Mm-hmm.
fortunately, I'm in good health and it just wasn't an issue. Life just sort of unfolded that way.
Mm-hmm.
And then Mark wanted two. And I said, well, let's have one and see how it goes. And then we had one, and he was like, no, I think I'm good. So, I mean, I always say this, like, if Mark had been like, no, I really want a second one, I would have been like, let's do it. And he always says, like, if I really wanted a second one, he would have been like, let's do it. But neither one of us, like, we were both
Super
good with one.
strongly.
So
Yeah.
no. I mean, if it had happened accidentally, it would have been fine. But like,
Mm-hmm.
we were both just good. It
Mm-hmm.
just felt like, okay, here's our family.
Yeah.
Um,
It's interesting again that we're having this conversation and recording it because I vividly remember conversations that you and I have had when I was like talking through the idea of having a kid, like pre-pandemic, trying to
mhm,
figure this out in my head. And even more recently, and I don't want to get too into the details, but talking about having a second one, right? Like you kind of told us about your thought process, and I'm sort of in the deciding place of this right
mhm,
now. And I
mhm,
feel like this decision is more fraught than the decision to have one. And I hear again, you can always go out there and research and find something that will sort of confirm your bias one way or the other. But there's so many people out there who will tell you, look, you already made the big leap with one. Like you already changed your life completely. You already like know what it's like to put somebody else first and to not sleep and all this stuff. Like one more on top of that, like you've got it. You already did it once. And then there's sort of my feeling about it, which is like now that I know how much work and time and dedication and exhaustion, and then trying to do that with a toddler also now. And it's funny because one like meme or reel I saw that I thought was really funny was it was describing like having a kid when you have a toddler is like playing a video game where you like get so far and then you die and you have to start all over again but with less health. I was like, that seems so accurate to me, right? It's
but you're
like
still playing the first game.
exactly. It's like you're starting all over again, but with like less of what you started with, and it's just like a whole thing. Anyway, but I really feel like very fraught because it's like it's crazy to see the evolution of from somebody who is like, I don't want to have kids. That seems like a terrible idea. Why would I ever want to do that? To having a kid and being so incredibly in love with him and with the whole process and with being a mom to now suddenly thinking about should I do this a second time? Like it's just
Mhm,
it's like a 180 doesn't even describe it. And so I'm like, my brain's trying to like catch up here. And I will say that even with all the like the research and the health that I am fortunate to have and I take care of myself and with the experience that I had the first time around, I am a little more worried potentially this time around, like being 40, um, having those small risks kind of go up, but also,
mhm,
just being more tired, being an older parent again. And it's all relative. Some people would say, yeah, 40 is not a big deal. That's not so old. But I think about, how old I'm going to be if I get lucky enough to be a grandparent, or how old am I going to be when my kid graduates high school or university or gets married. And these are things that are, again, I'm talking spirals now, but these are things that I think are almost more stressful now than it was debating the first one. And it's just, I guess, because it's compounding. And, I have read studies, and maybe we'll have to find those and put them in the show notes, that like additional kids do not add additional happiness to a life. Like people,
hmm.
they do these kind of subjective, I'm sure, because it's self reported studies about like, are you happier with a kid than you were before? Are you happier with two? Are you happier, even more happy with three? Like whatever. The
Mhm.
happiness is not exponential, right? But
But
potential.
I would think that's more of a snapshot though, because how you are with two kids under 5 is very different from how you are with two teenagers, is very different from how you are with two kids
It's
who are
true.
over 21. So
It's true. That's
you
very
might not
true.
report more happiness when you have a newborn and a 3.5-year-old.
That's a
That might
very good
not be your
point.
happiest moment. But when one is 6 and the other is 9, you might be having the time of your life. You
Yeah,
know,
that's
it's
a very good
there's
point.
and I'm not trying to talk you into it or out of
Oh
it,
no.
because obviously you and I have talked about this
Yeah.
offline and nobody can make this decision but you.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I don't know. I feel like happiness is one of those tricky, fleeting. It's like I have this conversation with my daughter all the time where she says, like, people say, like, oh, high school or college are the best years of your life. And I was like, that's such bullshit. Like,
Mm.
first of all, how sad would that be? Because you graduate high school at 18 and you have another 70 years of life.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
that
Mm-hmm.
would suck if that was it, you know? And
Mm-hmm.
plus, like, no matter how good your high school years are, you're going to have high points and low points. So I don't think there are best years of your life in a clump like that. I think
Right.
you have like one here and one there. And I
Mm-hmm.
think the same thing is true at parenthood. You're going to have those moments of happiness, you know, they're going to be experiences you can only have when you only have one kid.
Right.
And they're going to be experiences you can only have when you have more than one kid,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
you know?
I wonder too, I feel like maybe I should have like brought my mom on this podcast too, but another reason I wonder if some of us millennials are talking ourselves in circles about the idea of having more kids is related to kind of cultural shifts and expectations, and of course what social media does to us when we're all online comparing ourselves to other people's curated lives that aren't always accurate, where maybe some parents feel a pressure to do certain things or be certain things that maybe our parents didn't feel. And not that they didn't want to be good parents or present parents or
Of
do a ton of
course.
things, but obviously what we're exposed to these days, and the books and the ebooks and this is how to be the best stay-at-home mom or whatever, like there's just so much information and there's so many just little snapshots online that we're all scrolling through and looking at and absorbing, and making us feel like we have to have a activity for every moment of the day, and have don't you
Hmm.
dare put your kid in front of a screen, and you have to be present, and if you're on your phone you're going to ruin the kid's childhood, and just like so many things. And the food
Hmm.
has to be perfect, and you can't give them anything processed, like just the amount of stuff that you have to do to be the perfect parent. That again, I'm not saying it was easier at all. It's funny because Alex and I have talked about before, with our parents when they were, especially his mom, who's like stay-at-home mom for a couple years with like two kids who were only a year apart. And we were like, what did you do all day? Like when you guys went to dinner with a toddler, with two toddlers, you guys didn't have a tablet to like keep them what did you do? And they're just like, we just, I don't know, dealt with it, like just
Hmm.
figured it out. I'm like, man, like some of the technological advances really helped people these days. But I do wonder if, again, some of my reticence is like, I'm trying to be this most perfect, present, do everything parent for one. And I just literally don't know if I have the capacity, when maybe I should be thinking like, I don't know, is the perfectionism part of this conversation kind of taking over, right? I don't know.
I mean, I do think that's something to consider, is not just the fact of having another child, but also how your approach will change. We've all seen like the memes about, like, the first kid, there's 8,000 pictures, and the second kid, there's like 42 pictures. And the third kid, there's like 5 pictures.
That's me. Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like you will change, if you decide to do it, like your approach to parenthood will change. I also, I also think that, when you talk about social media and you talk about all of us kind of like comparing and judging each other and all of that, I think, and this ties into what we were talking about people not having kids, or like the number of kids you have always being wrong, because the number of kids you have is also like, not having kids is wrong, only having one is wrong,
Too
only
many
like
kids is
having three
wrong.
is too
Yeah.
many. Like no matter what you do, it's wrong. But I think some of that judgment that we all feel is the fact that some other people consider your decision either an acceptance or an indictment of their choices.
Mm-hmm.
So if I have kids and you decide not to, then it's not just your decision not to have kids for yourself. Then I have to be insulted because you didn't do what I'm doing. When in reality, what you do and your choice has absolutely nothing to do with me.
Right.
So I think a lot of those things that we all react to, especially as mothers, is it's sort of like this boomerang effect of like the judgment, where it's someone else is just like projecting all of their crap on you, how they feel about what their choices were.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, as much as you can kind of remove that from the equation, you know,
Yeah.
the better off you'll be. Because really, at
Yeah.
the end of the day, once you make the decision, you and Alex and Magnus are the only ones who have to live with it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Whatever you do only affects your family, not the people who are on social media telling you, over here telling you what to do.
So true. So true. I have to ask because I'm thinking like as the timing, the ages are lining up here, I'm realizing that you were basically managing your own sort of journey through menopause and perimenopause and
Mm-hmm.
menopause at the same time as your child was hitting
Going through
puberty.
puberty.
Yeah. So
Yep. My
how did
poor
that go?
husband.
How did that go?
um, I have to say, I have to say, because I don't want to disclose too much about her because it's
Sure.
her, like her
Yes.
private
Yes.
information, but um, everything went, I think, as well as it could have gone. And some of that was that I was determined to not have her period be a tragedy, and B, not have menopause be like a nightmare, have it seem like a nightmare. So when it became the time when like any minute now she was going to start her, her period, I wanted to give her like something to take to school with her just in case
Mm-hmm.
something happened. So she wouldn't be like, what do I do now? So we'd had like all the conversations about what happens and she was well informed, but so I went online looking for like first period kits and they were terrible. They were like, it was like painkillers and chocolate and like all this, like, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to you. Like that was the mood.
Mm-hmm.
Either that or it was like something for a little kid. Either that or it was like rainbows and bubblegum, and just either way, it just seemed so off. So I ended up making my own. I just made my own thing for her. Like I got her a cool bag and I put, some stuff in it and it was fine. So part of it is like sending the message that like what's happening to you is a good thing. It's not like you're a woman now. You're not a woman. You're, 11 years old or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But like, this is a milestone. It's a good thing that's happening. It's sometimes uncomfortable, but it's not the end of the world. And like, you're joining this like league of women. We all go through it, et cetera, et
Yeah.
cetera. But I also wanted her to see that I was going through menopause. I was having symptoms and stuff, and it was okay. Like
Yeah.
it's just like you're going through a phase. I'm going through one. You will go through this someday. And um, so, I think overall
Yeah.
it was pretty good all around. Not without its challenges, of course. I don't want to sugarcoat it, but generally speaking, I wanted her to see what I always want her to see, which is that I prioritize taking care of myself.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, when I was having like hot flashes and stuff, we just laughed about it. I would be like, it's
Mommy's
been
gonna
nice
put a
knowing you.
popsicle between her boobs for the
Yeah,
next
it's
10
been nice
minutes.
knowing you, but I am about to burst into flames, or I would like suddenly get really sweaty and we would just laugh about it, because
I vividly remember my mom buying this like really interesting little contraption that was like a mini fan that also squirted water, and she would just like aim it at her chest at like all times of the day. I really feel like there are so many periods in a woman, no pun intended, in a woman's life that are hormonally led, that are so, like you said, centered around negativity and fear. And
yeah.
it has to be a lack of information, right? The way the woman's body and how we react in our minds are this mysterious thing that no one could dare understand. And it's because obviously
Mm-hmm.
the sort of patriarchal society that's like built the medical system,
Mm-hmm.
and how we have
Hysteria.
complete lack of respect
Mm-hmm.
and understanding, which is a vicious cycle around women's health and women's hormones. And how, if you think about men, like men have hormonal changes in their life too, not nearly as drastic as women, but men go through puberty and it's a whole thing. I remember it.
And
Like I
men have a version of menopause too. I have news. Like
absolutely.
they
And
definitely do. Married to a man who's 51 years old, and
mhm,
he definitely has had
Sure.
changes. Like it's natural. We all do.
I mean, I'm not saying it's all like positive, like, men as they get older have to deal with potentially negative changes and talking about HRT and hormone therapy and all this stuff. But like, there isn't this like, okay, you have three main points in your life: puberty, pregnancy, and menopause. And they're all horrible. And like, here's what's going to happen. And it's going to be awful. And it's going to be so terrible. And
Hmm.
it's like we're setting ourselves up for this just life of like fearing our bodies and dreading it and dreading what comes
Hmm.
next. And, going back to earlier in the conversation when I was talking about things that irked me and how I have more empathy, it always made me really mad when people of any gender would say, I don't want to have a girl if I'm having a baby. Like, oh, please don't let me have a girl because they're so much more complicated. Wait until they're teenagers. You have to worry about periods and all that stuff. I'm like, that is so, even like joking, whatever, I can have a sense of humor, but like, this is built into a narrative that makes women already feel like everything about them is negative and an inconvenience and
Hmm.
trouble and something to just dread and fear. And it's like,
Yeah.
I hated it. I hated it so much. And I still
Yeah.
do. And I just think
Yeah.
it's an awful way to even just set up the baby that you're bringing into the world. Like, oh, this one's going to be
No,
trouble, like it's
I
just, ugh,
mean,
hate
I
it.
can't tell you how many times I meet someone new. I tell them I have a teenage daughter, and they're like, "Oh, how's that
Oh,
going?" And I'm like, "It's great. It's great. Are you kidding? My kid is fantastic, and it's so fun seeing, like seeing who she's becoming, and having like fun experiences with her. And yeah, she has her moments. I'm sorry, who doesn't? But I just feel like I don't know. It's the best. Like I mean, I've really truly have loved every stage except 3.5. As you know, three and a half, you can have it.
yeah.
We had 6 months of like, what is this? Um, and I don't mean to like make it sound like, oh, it's all been easy. It hasn't. None of it has been easy. But I don't know. I just get so much joy from her and so much like I just am in awe of her, and I love having a teenager and I love her friends. And yeah, we have there's a lot of shit to deal with,
Mm-hmm.
there's stuff about drugs, and there's stuff about sex, and there's stuff about all kinds of things. um and yeah, you got to deal with it, but it's worth it. And
Mm-hmm.
if you have a good like open relationship with your kid, which I'm very fortunate to have, and I recognize the privilege in that, but um I feel like I don't know, you get to see the world through a young person's eyes in a way that you don't get that view
Yeah.
otherwise.
Yeah.
I will say, you're talking about like going through menopause, right? As my child was going through puberty, that was a challenge. But to me, what was more challenging was trying to mother a small child while caring for a sick elderly parent. That to me was like that was the killer. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's something that we don't talk about, like mothering, like trying to mother your parents while you're
Yeah.
trying to mother your children. Um,
And what are
that,
your
I mean,
Yeah. What are your thoughts on? I think I'm going to know your answer because I know you, but like, what are your thoughts on going through something that's this difficult and this emotional? And how much of that, of your emotion, do you show to a young child? And I think there may be some discrepancy in like how old the child is and how much they can
totally.
understand. But
Yeah.
there's like, for me, and I have my own things with parents and how much
Hmm.
emotion maybe they showed growing up and how that reflected on me. But there's like this balance between, you want to be honest and you want to show your kids that you have emotions, that you respond emotionally to things and it's okay and it's normal. And then there's also a level of emotion that may be really terrifying and maybe overwhelming for a young kid, especially when we're
Yeah.
talking about death and things like that. So
Mhm.
how did you navigate that?
So Dylan was um, Dylan was 10 when my mother died. She died after, this couple of years of serious illness, but there had been years of less serious but still illness before that, and I was her caretaker. Um, so I think it really depends a lot on the child's age and also who the child is. You know, I don't claim to be any kind of parenting expert at all. I have one kid, what do I know? But and I don't have any background in psychology or anything, but I just I think having talked to a I had a neighbor at the time who was a psychologist, so I just used to ask her everything.
Mhm.
And she always said that basically you kind of gauge your level of emotion based on like you don't ever want to be relying on your young child to take care of you when you are going through something. So it's
Yes.
okay to show them how you want them to see how you feel. You want them to see that you go through emotions and that you feel grief and all of those things. But you don't necessarily want to be relying on them to comfort you or take care of you.
Mm,
So that I always sort of kept that in mind.
that's great.
Um, and so, you know, Mark and I are very honest with Dylan, and she knew, you know, she knew my mom was sick and she knew she was dying and all of that. And we just tried to we tried to give her enough information so she would know what was going on without getting too deeply into it or being too graphic. Like that was just information she didn't need at the time.
Yeah.
And now she's older, so she can ask. But
Hmm.
um, yeah, I just think I think that there's just knowing when it, and it's just true for like anything around how much you tell your child. It's like, are you telling your child because this is information they need, or are you telling them because you want to get it off your chest? It's fine to want to get it off your chest, but do that with another adult. Um, and just give your kid the information they need to in order to be able to have their own experience. And that was true about grief also. You know, my daughter had a great relationship with my mother and they were very close. So it wasn't just me losing my mother, it was her losing her grandmother.
Hmm.
So a lot of the time, I try to spend a lot of the time kind of focused with her, focused on that, focused on what she was going through in her grief process. And then I had friends and, you know, family and at the time a therapist to deal with my own grief situation.
I love this approach. And I think it's so healthy finding this line between your kid can and should know that you are a human being who struggles and has emotions and is experiencing things. But the boundary of it's not your kid's responsibility to kind of manage that in any way for you.
Hmm.
And it's funny because my mom's a child psychologist who I could ask her a lot of very objective questions, but some questions about our situation, it's like a little too close to home, I think.
Hmm.
And it's funny because she's upstairs. She's going to be watching Magnus while we're chatting. So maybe there's some things we can't chat about right now necessarily. But it does lead me to another topic that I think is interesting, and that is especially relevant to women who become mothers. And it's this sort of concept and this fear around becoming your mother. Like, oh, as you get older, right? And as you become a parent,
Hmm.
and all the things that frustrated you about your mother or the interactions that you had, and then you start maybe seeing little, and I think this happens with men too, you're becoming your dad or whatever, but it's so often kind of this like negative connotation of like, oh, no matter how hard I try, right, I say something and it just sounds like my mother speaking through me, right? And we
Yeah.
kind of laugh and joke about it, and I mean for some people maybe it's like a lovely beautiful thing, but I think that the overarching kind of theme here is like people try not to become their mothers and then they do anyway.
Hmm.
What do you, I mean, I think you had a good relationship with your mom, a very close one.
Hmm.
Doesn't mean again that there aren't sort of ups and downs and challenges like any relationship, but what do you think about that whole kind of concept and like the idea that again maybe it's just a cultural kind of theme that the mother daughter relationship especially is one that can be really tricky, and I don't know if that goes back to just the misogyny of like women and their emotions, you know, I don't know, what do you think?
I mean, I do think it's complicated with mothers and daughters. You know, for any number of reasons. And I think it's different with each set of mothers and daughters. Like you have the situation of you have like where they're competitive with each other, which Dylan and I are not that way, but like I think that happens, you know, women like who don't want to admit that they're aging. And so they try to be like their teenage daughters or, you know, like in Mean Girls, you know, I'm a cool mom,
Mm-hmm.
that whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you have like the parents who are super strict disciplinarians where you know they tell the daughter like you can't wear makeup until you're 18 and then the daughter is like sneaking around and so I think
Mm-hmm.
there's all different types of dynamics that can happen with mothers and daughters.
Mm-hmm.
um, and there's also I don't know if this is true for everyone but certainly in like the I don't know this is true of like I'm Jewish so this is true of like Jews but like there's this whole idea of like raise the daughters, mother the sons, where you're just like
Oh,
tougher on
that's
the
not just
girls.
Jews, my friend.
Okay, so
Nope, not
okay,
at all.
fair enough. Um, so I mean, my situation is just so different from my mother's. My mother, like I said, she's a single mother. My dad was impossible and made her life so difficult. And so she, at the age of 35, she had a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old, and she was on her own, which I can't begin to imagine what that was like. And at the time in the world when like women were just beginning to be able to like get mortgages on their own and all that kind of stuff. So like I can't begin to imagine what that was like for her. And I am happily married, and it's just a totally different situation. So and it's a different cultural time. Like parents, when I was being raised were, I mean, kids were feral. Like we were just left alone. And it
Mhm.
wasn't just my family, it was every family. I mean, you talk to anybody in Generation X and they will tell you, like, we didn't see our parents, and it was like, come home whenever. And, there were commercials on TV. It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are? Because a lot of people didn't.
Wild.
So, and now I feel like if you did half the things that our parents did, like somebody would call the police on you. So it's just such a different way of raising kids. And I think that there are problems with the way that we are raising our kids now. There were problems with the way they did it. There are problems with the way we're doing it. And I don't have any illusions about that. I think we've swung the other way a little too much with like helicopter parent. And I put myself in this category too. Um, so I'm not saying other people are doing this. Like I see myself doing it, like doing stuff that I'm like, this is not helping her. Like
Yeah.
she needs to do this for herself. So I think, I think you're always going to find mistakes. Mistakes are always made between parents and kids, mothers and daughters, mothers and sons, fathers. I mean, all of us, we're all just like trying to make our way the best we can. And my relationship with Dylan has a lot of through lines from my mother, a lot of things that she did that I really appreciated, that I was determined to do with my kid if I ever had one. Like being honest and open with her, and always, answering her questions, and making sure that she knows she can say to me, Mom, I'm really mad at you, or you really messed up here. Like I always wanted her to have the ability to do that because I did.
Mhm.
Um, and that kind of stuff. And like my mom did smart things, like if I was reading a book in high school, she would read the same book and she would bring it up at dinner. She would be like, hey, I just read this. Like, what do you think about it? She wasn't heavy handed about it, but it just had this, it just fostered this, like,
Mm.
this love of books and this love of conversation around books. And
And
so she
she's
did
interested in
certain,
what you're doing, and
yeah, she always knew what I was doing, like that kind of stuff. And then there are things that my mom did that I wouldn't dream of doing with my kid.
Mhm.
So I
Yeah.
think that's probably true for most parents.
I wonder if this sounds too cliche, but it kind of seems like the right approach is, you can't expect to be perfect and to not make mistakes, but you want to try not to make the same mistakes that your parents made with you, because it shows some semblance of you kind of maybe learning from previous mistakes. We always want to
A
learn,
hundred
right?
percent.
So
A
make
hundred percent.
different mistakes.
Make mistake, and that's the thing. I mean, what you just said is so important about not being perfect, because I don't think you're doing your kids any service if you are perfect. Like,
Sure.
first of all, what even is perfect?
Yeah.
But let's say you are. Let's say there is a definition of perfect and you are it. What are you teaching your
What
child?
are they learning? Yeah.
Right. I think it is better, and maybe I'm just rationalizing, but I think it is better to fuck up in front of your kid and then be like, you know what? I just messed that up and I'm really sorry. Like own it in front of them. And
That's
that's how
huge.
they learn. Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
And even with them, like you mess up with them. Like, I mean, I'm trying to think, oh, I showed up to Dylan's school one day to pick her up, and I wasn't thinking, and I had like done my hair the way her hair was done that day. It was so thoughtless of me. Like I just wasn't, and she saw me and she looked horrified and she started taking hers out. And I was like, in that moment, I was like, oh my God, I'm so stupid. And I immediately was like, I am so sorry. That was so thoughtless of me, because no, it's not cool when your mom shows up looking like you. That is not cool.
Sure.
And instead of being like, what, I'm cool. No,
Yeah.
like that was
Mm-hmm.
not okay. And I should have been more thoughtful.
Mm-hmm.
So, and for her now, it's like she laughs about it now, but that's the thing. Like I made a mistake and I embarrassed her. And then I apologized.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is more important than like being so hyper about never ever messing up.
I think that may be something that Gen X learned from the previous generation because knowing some boomer people, I'm speaking quietly right now, who I've never heard apologize once in their life ever for anything. And that is a problem. It's not
Hmm.
good. And
Hmm.
I think it takes a lot of confidence and humility to apologize to and in front of your children, really. Like, because again, people are brought up to think I'm the authority, I'm the parent, even if I'm not 100% right. Just like, don't worry about it, you're a kid, respect me and move on. And never hearing your parents ever apologize, again, it's like sort of that, like, what are they learning from a perfect parent? What are they learning from a parent who pretends they're perfect when they obviously are not? It
Hmm.
nothing good. I wanted to go back though to the, like the moms raising daughters and that kind of relationship. And you mentioned the whole like mothers maybe sort of treating daughters and sons differently. And I come from a big family with lots of daughters and sons, and that's something I can relate to. But I also feel like it's kind of a tougher ask than just on the surface. It's like, well, of course, treat all your kids equally. Of course, love them all equally, hold them to the same standards, all of that stuff. And in a very general sense, that makes sense, right? Like you shouldn't have higher standards or lower standards or better, whatever, different treatment for different kids. But gender aside, your kids are different people too, and they're going to have different behaviors and different capabilities and different, just whatever ways of interacting with the world. And so it's not so easy, I think, maybe in practice to just say, well, treat all your kids the same and don't baby one more than the other or don't treat one better or whatever. It's how do we kind of frame that? Like I only have one kid, he's boy. You have one kid, she's girl. Like, how do we? It's hard for us to kind of comment on this because we don't have
Hmm.
multiple kids. We don't have different kids that we're kind of, I'd be interested maybe for people who are listening to write in your thoughts on this and maybe your
Hmm.
recommendations or your suggestions, because I think, again, maybe it goes back to showing um, acceptance and love and just sort of being there and listening and caring for your child through whatever it is that they're going through, wanting the best for your child, all of these things, which again kind of sound like platitudes, but they're important. But how does that manifest in terms of treating your kids in a way that can feel fair to the children who are there and are paying attention and are watching the behavior? I think we know a lot of people, pretty much everybody here either has had this experience or knows somebody who's had the experience where they felt like they were treated differently than a sibling in a way that was unfair, right? And again,
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
you
But
know
I think it's okay to not treat your kids exactly the same because as you say, they're different people. They have different needs, they have different abilities. Um, there's that meme that's like I've seen a bunch of times where it's like, isn't it funny how one of your kids you could leave overnight alone at the age of 7 and they would like take the garbage out and take care of themselves, and the other one like isn't allowed to hold an umbrella, you know, at age 12.
yeah.
So I think there is that. I think there's legitimacy to that. I mean, again, I'm speaking out of my ass because I have no idea. I only have one kid, but I think that is different from automatically seeing your kids differently strictly because of their gender. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
like out like before they even demonstrate to you how they're going to behave, you have a certain way you treat your daughter and a certain way you treat your son, and it's different because of that.
Mm-hmm.
um that there's just, to me, there's like a big spectrum there between those two things.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that.
It's almost like pushing your kids into activities like, tell and I'm this is very stereotypical, but like pushing your son into sports and pushing your daughter into like, sewing,
Mm-hmm.
something like that. Like you wouldn't do, like nobody would do
Mm-hmm.
that now, or at least
Mm-hmm.
most people I think wouldn't do that now. It's the
Mm-hmm.
same thing with how you treat them. Like treat them how they are based on their personality, not like because,
They're a boy
this
or a
one.
girl. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. since we're, looking at this through the lens of aging too, I think another topic that's kind of interesting is how the relationship with your kid changes as you get older, right? So I'm still very deeply in the throes of very like attached toddler parenting. Like I spend
Hmm.
most of my time with him. I'm still his favorite person. Thank goodness. I'm going to hold on to it for as long as is
Hmm.
appropriate to do so. But we're still, he's still a baby. He's still an infant technically.
Hmm.
Getting older and bigger by the day, but we're still very much in that, he's around me all the time, wants to be around me all the time. That's great. Um, but we all, if we're fortunate enough to have good relationships with our parents as we become adults, and you kind of slowly see the shift, maybe from like when you're in high school, and then maybe you go off into the world, you become an adult, and you kind of come back, and dynamics shift. And it's more of like maybe a friendly thing, or just less of a strictly kind of hierarchical sort of relationship. And if you're lucky, right, it doesn't always happen that way. Um, is that something that you're starting to, and I know, your daughter is still, she's younger, she's a teen, but she's not an adult officially yet. Is she?
Hmm.
She's not an adult officially.
No, she's
Not by our
15.
standards. Yeah. So are you starting to kind of feel any sort of shift? Are you starting to think about like what's that going to be like? Like, what if she goes off to college or university, or she moves away and starts a life and she comes back and all this stuff? Like, how are you feeling about that, or have you thought about it at all?
No, totally. The shift for me definitely happened with high school. Like
Yeah.
she's now in high school. And I think Mark and I both had a moment of like, wait a minute. wait, wait, wait a minute. she's in,
Slow down.
she's in, she's in high school. That means like, this is finite. I mean, like you raise your kid and like, and you're, intellectually that at a certain point they're going to grow up and move out and that's going to happen. But like, I don't think you ever, at least I never really, really internalized it. But suddenly she's in high school and it's like, I know how fast elementary school went by. So I'd be like, and we're trying not to talk about it too much because in high school, that like all they ever talk about is college. It's constantly part of the conversation, constantly. And we want her to be able to just like be in high school for a minute, especially because here in New York City, she had to apply and there was like a
Yeah.
whole application process. And so it took a lot of work just to get here. So we
Mm-hmm.
want her to just be here for the moment. But it does come up and we talk about it. And um, so, yeah, I see, I'm going to call it the finish line. Obviously, it isn't because
Sure.
you're their parent forever.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope we're close forever. But yeah, I mean, I see it. And the difference between this time last year and this time now is the growth it's massive. I mean, it is just massive. Like the change from 13 and 14 into 15 is just huge. So, and I assume that will keep going, that this year to next year will be a big leap. And,
It's
so
giving me like
yeah,
goosebumps hearing it, and like hearing the term like
it
the finish line. Like it.
like it's crazy to think about it, but like my daughter's going to graduate high school in 2027. That's just not that far from now, you
No,
know?
no, that's
So yeah, it's weird. It is really weird. And it's exciting and great. And like I want her to feel that excitement and I want her to feel like we're excited for her, which we are. Um, and neither one of us wants her to go to college in New York. We really want her to get out and see something different. And she doesn't want to go to school here, which I think is really good and healthy. Um, but like, yeah, it's crazy to think. I mean, last summer she went away for 2 weeks and I missed her desperately. I mean, like I let her go. I wasn't like
mm-hmm,
texting her every 5 minutes or whatever.
mm-hmm.
But like, yeah, it's hard to imagine that she's going to be like gone,
Yeah.
for long periods.
There's some great universities up here near me. Just saying, just throwing that out there. Anyway.
I mean,
Anyway.
anything could happen. You never know.
Okay, so we're over the hour mark here. We could do this forever. I mean, there's so many other directions that we could go here, but I think, one of the things that I wanted to keep kind of as a thread in this conversation is um progression and like evolution and change through your life, right? And
Yeah.
in this case, it's as it relates to being a parent. And I said at the beginning of the conversation, I asked you maybe what are some things that changed. Um, about you when you became a parent. And I think there's probably a lot of little things here and there. I think it's important maybe to pay attention to and celebrate the things that haven't changed, because there is so much conversation about how you become unrecognizable when you become a mother. And there, again, it's another form of fear mongering. You can look at it
Mm-hmm.
positively, like I became less selfish, or I became more loving, or I became more of who I wanted to be, or whatever. But there's
Mm-hmm.
also some fear around that, right? For people, especially like me, that was a massive fear of mine, was
Mm-hmm.
not because I thought I was so perfect, but I'm like, I'm me. I don't want to be somebody else. I don't want to completely change having a kid and look different and feel different and behave different and be a different person. I kind of like, I've spent this whole time trying to be me. I don't want to be something different. And I think one of the things I've thought about as I've sort of come out of the real slog that is the first couple of years, and I'm again coming out of it and my brain's clearing itself out a little bit, is, all of the ways that I have changed are things that I'm okay with and that I feel good about, and that I think was probably a right for me. Like I can reconcile them and come to terms with them. And the things about me that are still the same are things that, for the most part, again, I'm not a perfect person, but they're things that I were important to me, and so they're still here because they're core and foundational to who I am. And it's you're going to grow and change as you get older regardless, I would hope, right? We all kind of
Mm-hmm.
learn things and try new things, have new experiences, and take things away from those new experiences. So whether it's motherhood or different jobs or moving or new relationships or whatever it is that you're doing, you're going to change anyway. So one of my biggest hangups was this like fear of what would happen if I made changes, these irrevocable changes, like having a kid. You can't take that back. It's scary to me, right? But I think it's cool to think about the ways that you are changing. And similar to what you've said in a previous conversation, is we're lucky to get to change and evolve and grow, because we're still here, and we're still here year after year learning and getting older. And so I think it's cool. I've really, again, 180'd on this whole concept of thinking like, yeah, there are things about me that are very different now that I'm a mom. My priorities and the ways I spend my time and the things I'm interested and not interested in. And you can look at that like, oh, back in the day I was different or more fun or had better abs or whatever it is that you were before you were a kid. But I like the new me. And it's not because I had a kid to be a better person. I just think we're all just kind of rolling along and changing and growing. And there's still bits of the old me and bits of the new me, and they're shoved together to be whatever I am now. And I like it. I think that it's an okay way to go about life. Like, is that kind of, you
Well,
with me on that?
can I make an observation about you?
Sure.
As someone who knew you pretty well before you had Magnus and
Yeah.
someone who knows you pretty well now,
Yeah.
one of the things that I have loved about watching this, sort of journey that you're on, I hate to use that word because it's so
Mm-hmm.
overused, but like,
Mm-hmm.
um, is that the aspect of your personalities, the aspects of your personality that you have carried into motherhood. It's like amazing to watch that. You know what I mean? Like you have this, you have an intensity and very much you're a very thoughtful person and very your confidence and all these things about you that I just respect and admire so much. It's amazing. It was amazing to see you before motherhood, just conduct yourself in life, and then to see how those things have applied in your time with Magnus. It's inspirational. It really is. I think I mean, I'm your biggest fan. I think you're incredible.
I appreciate
Um,
that.
but I have loved watching you, you become who you are as Magnus's mother, and also watching your family, how your family has evolved, like all of it. But so much of it is a tribute to just the way you are as a person and the way you approach all the important things in your life.
I love that. I love that. It makes me feel too like, in my case, having a child enhanced my life. It didn't become my life. It isn't the entirety of my life. It has greatly enhanced it. And I love the touching on the intensity part, because this is another thing I'd like to sort of, as we close up, one of the great arguments for loving yourself and having confidence in yourself. And you kind of spoke to this earlier too, about how it's made you, advocate for yourself more and stand up for yourself more, is seeing your characteristics and your traits that show up in your kid and how much you love them because you love everything about your kid. And so you're kind of forced to reckon with like that thing that, maybe I didn't love about myself, or maybe even things that people said negatively about me. And I'm seeing them in my kid and I'm like, that's amazing. That's badass. And the intensity thing is one, certainly, because nobody in my family would be described as chill or laid back ever. And Magnus had no chance being a chill kid based on his two parents, but he's an intense child. And that is objectively fact. And anybody
Right.
who spends any time with him will tell you, like, the look in his eyes and the way he speaks and the things he's interested in, just the way he carries himself, that's an intense child. And I'm like, you got that from your mama and your dad, but also from your mama. So I'm
See,
proud of
that
you.
it could have gone the other way, right? Like he could
100%.
have been the most chill and you both would have been like, what do we do with this?
I
What do
can't
we do
imagine.
with this child?
I mean, there's a nature nurture
Yeah.
component, right? Like it's the whole like
Yeah.
genetics, your genetics
Yeah.
are the gun and you pull the trigger, while he
Yeah.
came out of the womb with intensity and then it just flourished from there. But
I
anyway,
love it.
it's
I love
amazing.
it.
Well, I think that this was super fun. I love having this conversation with you. I love all of the conversations we have about motherhood. I think that this would be a really good one too, because this was so freewheeling and there's so many directions we could take it. I'd love to get feedback from listeners to be like,
Yeah.
okay, that was cool. You guys went all over the place, but I'd love for you to talk about XYZ and really kind of dive into some stuff. And maybe we'll do some stuff when my mother isn't in the other room. But anyway, my child behavioral psychologist mother who's in there with my toddler right now, or she could come on and she could do a master class, who knows.
I mean, you know this because I've said this to you a million times, but I have not yet met your mom. But
Soon
when I do, I'm
we'll
gonna
have to
like
do
pull,
another episode.
no, I'm gonna like pull her into a corner and be like, tell me everything. Like, how did you raise this person?
Oh my goodness, I don't know if you're ready for that conversation, but anyway, you'll set aside some time. But anyway,
Yeah, I would
this was
love to
really
get people's feedback. I mean,
yeah,
about this, about anything, like anything that
sure,
we're talking about, anything they want us to talk more about, or anything that they just want to tell us about their experience,
yes,
like anything
yes.
that, I
I would
would love to
love
hear it.
stories, feedback. I've been asking about this for a
Hmm.
while with Muscle Science for Women, is I want to hear more people's stories. Like some of my favorite podcasts are people writing in to talk about their relevant experiences, especially if
Hmm.
it's something that you think could help other people because maybe they're in similar situations, or maybe it would just make people feel less alone or more heard or whatever. I mean, that's what we're doing, right? We're telling
Hmm.
our stories because maybe it helps other people as well as entertains them. And I do feel like this one was a more intimate conversation than many. And certainly it could have gotten even further down the rabbit hole and maybe someday, but this is, motherhood is a very personal, intimate experience. And that can be a positive thing, that can be a scary thing, but this is emotional, right? So I'm just interested in hearing how people felt about it and what they think and what's come up for them, and if there's something else in this realm that you want us to kind of talk about. We would love that. So
Hmm.
the email is muscle science for women, for the number four, at gmail.com. We'd love your feedback, thoughts, commentary, anything that you want to give us. And I guess that's it for today. Who knows what massive life changing topic we'll come up with next? Stay tuned. It'll be good.